Hey, what's up again? I want to talk about one of my favorite characters. Now, I know I'm a little late to the party because the movie's been out for a while, but I wanted to give a chance for everyone to see it who has any desire to see it whatsoever. So, this is going to be a spoiler-heavy review of sorts of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the things that I think just didn't work. Now, you can see I'm a big fan. I've got my Spider-Man shirt on, I've got my Spider-Man trucker cap, I got Spider-Man over here behind me. I'm a fan, and that's why it pains me to say that this movie just wasn't very good. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some things that were. Spider-Man's costume was pretty darn awesome looking, and the fight scenes, while they were short, the choreography and the movements and the way he used his web as an extension of himself was just like the comics, and it was pretty friggin' incredible. You know, I gotta give him credit for that. Another good thing was the relationships between Peter Parker and the other characters, you know, Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, and Aunt May. Those were really well done, and I enjoyed those parts. Let's see, what else? Oh, that's it. The rest of the movie, I could take or leave, and that sucks to say as a Spider-Man fan who was looking forward to this movie and who wanted it to be good. Now, if you don't want the movie spoiled for you, and you're waiting for it to come out on Redbox or DVD or Blu-ray or something, well, you probably shouldn't watch this, and you should probably go ahead and just pick something else to watch. Might I recommend this one? I hear it's pretty good. If you don't care about that, let's get right into the 5 things that suck about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Number 5, The Untold Story. Now, in Amazing Spider-Man 1, it was billed as telling the untold story, which is the story of Peter Parker's parents. I think halfway through the movie, they kind of forgot that they were telling that story because it was never resolved, and it was just left hanging as, ooh, something we want to see. Unfortunately, we don't really care about it, but it is resolved in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In fact, a good portion of the screen time is devoted to it. You know, a good chunk that should have been spent in character development, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Now, there's this whole convoluted story about how Peter Parker's dad was working with Norman Osborn and they created the Spider Serum, but it would only work with Parker blood, so it made Peter basically predestined to become Spider-Man, which is kind of stupid and kind of detracts from the character. Now, I don't mind changes in these comic book movies because obviously, you know, you've got such a history in the comics that you can't really do it in a movie, so you can make changes as long as they make sense. Like, I didn't mind Captain America being a founding Avenger in the Marvel Universe. Makes sense, even though he wasn't in the comics. I'm cool with that, I'm on board. But I don't like changes for the sake of changes that change the character from who it's supposed to be. It makes no sense. And, you know, this whole Peter Parker's parents plot line, once it's resolved, which it finally is in this movie, once it gets to that resolution in a completely ridiculous way, by the way, it's never brought up again. It's never mentioned. You know, there should be like a little scene with Peter talking to Aunt May and going, hey, my parents weren't traitors, so everything's cool now. But there was nothing. It was never brought up again. Right after he discovers it, he goes to Gwen and he's like, so, okay, let's go to England. I'm going to move to England with you. I'll fight Jack the Ripper. Whatever. This movie just spent 20 to 30 minutes or whatever on an entire plot line that just nobody cares about. And then it doesn't pay off. So, why do it? And also, why does Peter only care about his dad? Why doesn't he like his mom? What did she ever do? Number 4. The trailer. Just like in the original Amazing Spider-Man, the trailer, for whatever reason, shows all these scenes and clips that aren't in the movie. Like, take for example this one. Do you remember it from the trailer?
You're gonna want to see this.
Oscorp.
Yet you
Under surveillance.
Why? Isn't that the question of the day?
Now, do you remember that in the movie? No, because it wasn't there. And I don't quite understand why they keep doing it, because even up to and including the final trailer for the movie, it still had these clips in it. So it's like, halfway through, they're just like, okay, let's change this whole story again. I don't like it. It kind of sucks, so let's just drop all that and add some new stuff in. And it didn't work. It's like you're being sold something and you're not getting it. And it seems like by the time the final trailer rolls around, you know what's going to be in the movie and what's not. Especially if it's a major plot point that you were working on. It's just weird and it doesn't make sense. The other thing with the trailer is it gives away every important moment in the film. Everything. You see Gwen Stacy dying, you see all the fights with the bosses, and in fact, if you see the trailer, you've seen the entire Rhino fight, by the way. So there's that. And it just gives away too much, and then it gives away stuff that's not even in the movie. So it's like both extremes, and it's just weird. Number 3, character development. Now, by that I mean complete lack of character development for the villains. They spend, so much time with that untold story that should have been spent focusing on your villains, I don't think 3 villains was overlooked, but I think they did it completely wrong, and they didn't spend enough time with each of them because they packed in all this other crap that nobody cared about. You have the Rhino, who, if you saw the trailer, you'd think he was a focus, but he wasn't. He was only in it at the beginning and at the end, and that was it. And apart from the way he looks, which was completely ridiculous, I don't have a problem with him in the movie, because in the comics, Spider-Man would often take care of a bunch of little things before he moved on to the main event. That's fine. I like that. That's cool. It works. Electro, who I'm not even going to get into the whole Riddler thing and how his character is basically the same. Jamie Foxx did a great job with what he had, but what he had was a shit sandwich. And the shit sandwich just isn't tasty. I don't care who cooked it. Pre-Electro Max Dillon was just a waste. He's just a nerdy guy that nobody likes, that nobody, that everyone ignores and takes advantage of. Okay, but he loves Spider-Man, and then he falls into the eels, and he gets his power somehow, and then he's talking to Spider-Man in the city, and now he hates Spider-Man, so he's gonna fight him. I just told you the entire character development of Electro. Harry Osborn is the Goblin. I don't mind them skipping over Norman. I can deal with that and going straight to Harry. Okay, whatever. But you never hear about it in the first one, I don't think. And then all of a sudden he shows up, and it's like, hey, we're best friends forever. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but we're bros. Let's go skip some stones and talk about girls. The chemistry between Dane DeHaan and Andrew Garfield was pretty good, actually. But they were given nothing to work with. If they were actually given something decent to work with, it would have been so much better. But instead, you have that Harry finds out he's getting sick, so he asks Peter to get Spider-Man to give him some blood. Spider-Man says no because, hey, we don't know what that's going to do to you. And then he starts working with Electro, and they break in, and he gets a suit. He gets the Goblin suit that, has healing powers, by the way. So why does he need the blood? Why can't he just use the suit? I don't quite get that, but he gets the suit, and then all of a sudden he's like a badass Goblin zooming around on his glider. When did he learn to do that? Because there was no time for him to learn that from the time he got it to the time he fought Spider-Man. It's just, I think Electro should have been left out of the movie completely, because I think they wasted the character. The entire thing should have been focused on Harry and Peter, their relationship, and how it slowly goes sour, and it doesn't just flip. Harry should have known that Peter was Spider-Man much longer than he did from when he found out. It should have been arch enemies, because in the comics, the Green Goblin is Spider-Man's arch enemy, just like the Joker is for Batman. You know, and in this one, he just, as soon as they meet up the very first time, that's it. Not cool, Mark Webb. What the fuck were you thinking? Number 2 is something I like to call Avenger-itis. That's where the Marvel Cinematic Universe was built up. And now every comic book movie company wants to follow in the footsteps and build a universe. Sony is trying that with the Spider-Man franchise. I'm interested. I think it would be pretty cool. But the problem is they're rushing it. Hopefully not, but it looks like Warner and DC are following in that same footstep by throwing too many things into the pot at one time. The reason the Marvel Universe works is because they took their time. They developed it. What is the weakest Marvel Universe movie? Iron Man 2. And that's simply because they try and pack too much in. I still think this movie is worse than Iron Man 2. And that pains me to say because I love Spider-Man more, definitely, than Iron Man. But I just think this movie missed the plot completely. Most of the time, it just felt like a build-up for the Sinister Six. You know, they're packing the villains in without developing any of them. And you know, it's like, let's just get through this. We don't care about this movie. Let's just get through it so we can make the one we want to make. And that's not the way you do it. You gotta slow build it and not rush things. And finally, number 1. The night Gwen Stacy died. That's right. The best thing about this movie is the thing that pissed me off the most. Because it's basically like they took a cheap synopsis of who Spider-Man is. You know, okay, he's a nerdy kid that gets bitten by a spider. He gets spider-like powers. He's a science whiz. And he cracks jokes when he fights. That's your Spider-Man. They miss the important pieces that actually turn the character to who he is. Yeah, in the Sam Raimi one, we may have been beaten over the head with the line, with great power comes great responsibility. But in this, we don't get it, and Peter Parker never seems to learn that sense of responsibility. Okay, in The Amazing Spider-Man 1, Uncle Ben's death is not directly Peter's fault, so he doesn't learn anything from that. In this one, he is absolved from any kind of responsibility because they intentionally make Gwen decide on her own to go into the battle, which ultimately costs her life, okay? Now, let me give a little bit of backstory on the comic version because, you know, the movie basically just throws that scene in there because it happened in the comics. And that's not the way you do things. If you're going to do it because it happened in the comics, you do it right. You get the idea behind it, you nail it, and they had the perfect opportunity and they blew it. Anyway, in the comics, Gwen Stacy never knew that Peter was Spider-Man. Never. However, the Goblin knew that Peter was Spider-Man. They were arch enemies. They knew each other. They had fought many times. They hated one another. In this movie, as soon as Electro is gone, the Goblin comes zooming down, and I kid you not, he looks at Peter, then he looks at Gwen, looks at Peter, looks at Gwen, looks at Peter, and says, "Oh, you're Peter Parker. You wouldn't give me your blood. I'm gonna kill your girlfriend. Ha 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 ha." No motivation for the Goblin to do that. They had never even fought before. This was their first fight. In the comics, the Goblin comes to Peter's apartment to have that final showdown. He's not there. Gwen is there, sitting there, waiting on Peter to come home. And Goblin busts in, kidnaps her, takes her to the bridge, which is where she ultimately dies. She was directly taken through no fault of her own and killed through no fault of her own. She was as innocent as can be. In this movie, they even give her a speech where she says, "Nobody makes my decisions for me. Nobody tells me what to do. I do it what I want." Peter tries to keep her. He even goes so far as to web her hand to the car so she can't move. and yet she cuts it off. She comes into the fight. It's her fault she dies, not Peter's. Yeah, if I didn't know the history of this iconic story arc and just how important it was in both the character's life and just in comics in general, I would like the scene because they had the balls to kill her, even though she was a great character and everybody loved her. But it's ruined because it's completely superficial. Completely. Like I said, they did it because they did it in the comics. She should have died in the third one, but they completely rushed the story and ruined what should have been the greatest Spider-Man scene ever. Goblin had no motivation. It was Gwen's fault. What does Peter learn? Nothing. You know, he failed Uncle Ben in the comics. He failed Gwen Stacy in the comics. Those two events haunted him for his entire career. Now in the comics, he shoots his web down and it snags her leg and cracks her neck. In the movie, however, he tries to save her and he's just a little bit too late. So as he grabs her, her head hits the ground. So it's unclear. You know, it could have been Whiplash. We don't know. Because they made it so obscure that you can't really put the blame onto Peter. And it's totally his fault. It's supposed to be his fault. It's what makes him who he is. And they've completely missed the point. It's irritating as a fan who was looking forward to this moment to have it just snatched away when it could have been perfect and it should have been perfect. But anyway, what did you think about it? Are you a super spider nerd? Did you like the movie? Did you hate the movie? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you're so inclined and you want to hear me rant about other shit, you know, in the future, hit that little subscribe button up there. Or give me a thumbs up. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. Write down the URL and send it to your grandma. She might like it. You never know. I mean, grandmas are cool. So anyway, until next time, deuces.